Welcome to Lecture 5 on the cereal industry, Part 5 on sorghum. This lecture is in Agronomy 2 ALM210, which is a subject offered in the agricultural degree at North Melbourne Institute of TAFE, an education institution based in Australia. Please visit our website for details on this subject and the other course and education products that we offer at www.nmit.edu.au. My name is Dr. Nikki Cooley. In this lecture series we are also looking at wheat, rice, barley and rye, so please ensure that you watch these lectures to complete your notes on this area. Sorghum is a native crop of Africa, and it is related to the plant millet. It was believed to be domesticated in 5000 BCE. It has been a staple food of the upland dry parts of Africa and India for many years. It was cultivated in the US in the 1950s as a sugar and grain crop. It can be grown on poor nutrient soils and is adapted to hot and low rainfalls. There are a number of varieties of sorghum. There are sorghum annual forage hybrids, there is sweet sorghum, sorghum vulgare, and there is also Sudan grass hybrids. Sorghum is a vigorous annual grass. It has a solid stalk up to 2.5 centimeters in diameter with many leaves and looks similar to corn. Varieties can come in either short or tall versions. The short version is 0.6 to 1.2 meters tall, while the tall varieties can go up to 4.6 meters. The inflorescence is a pinnacle that varies in shape depending on the type. The grain can have up to 2,000 overall grains. Sorghum has an extensive root system. It also has waxy small leaf areas. It has the morphological feature of leaf curling, which enables it to survive in dry conditions. Sorghum is Australia's predominant summer grain crop and is typically grown in northern New South Wales and the Darling Downs in Queensland. It is domestically produced predominantly for the livestock food market, but is also critical in crop rotations. It is suited to dry land and irrigated sorghum on heavy clays, good soil with good water holding capacity. It is good for weed and disease control. With sorghum, certain varieties have been bred for certain functions. Sudan grass and Sudan hybrids have been bred for grazing and hay. They are suited for repeated heavy grazing with excellent recovery between grazing. The feed quality is often higher than the Sudan grass by grain sorghum hybrids. It's suited to hay making because its tillers are heavy and has finer stems other than sorghums. Lower prussic acid than other foliage sorghums, which also make it very suitable for grazing. BMR sorghum with sweet sorghum is a brown mid-rib variety that grazes at between 1 and 1.2 meters. It has a reduced ligand content with a high digestibility. It may be sensitive to lodging. The sorghum hybrids are varieties with high foliage yield combined with high yield content. However, there is limited grazing recovery for this variety, and they have been specifically developed for the silage industry. The sweet sorghum hybrids are known to be late flowering cultivars for standover grazing into autumn. They can be used for grazing hay or silage. They have coarse-stemmed varieties for pit silage and narrow-stemmed varieties for long bale silage. They have tall flowering types with thick stems and high sugar contents, and are most suitable for standover feed in the autumn and winter. There are early flowering types with fine stems that have low prussic acid and can be managed for silage by allowing them to set seed, but harvest them when the seeds are soft. Fine stem cultivars can be used in both pit and rolled bale silage. There is limited regrowth in the hybrids when high prussic acid levels can occur in some of these species. Many used for standover feed into autumn, winter or silage, and the preferred planting of these hybrids is December to January. Sweet sorghum and Sudan grass hybrids are compact plants and leafy. They tend to have juicy and sweet stems, which making them ideal for livestock. Livestock can be grazed in the autumn because of the late flowering cultivars. They are used as grazing and hay. They have low prussic acid concentrations and rapid regrowth. The sorghum and Sudan grass hybrids are ideal for heavy repeated grazing as they have excellent regrowth characteristics. There is great potential for high dry matter yield, and the ideal graze height is 1 metre. Early maturing types require strict grazing management in order to maximise both their fodder yield and feed quality. Sorghum growing conditions are listed below. It tends to do better on heavy clays where the water holding capacity is better. If it's sown on lighter soils, you may get reduced productivity unless frequent rainfall or it is irrigated. It is best to sow when the soil temperature is above 16 degrees C. Moisture is key to this crop, and ideally it needs to be between 500 and 18 millimetres of moisture. It has low flooding tolerance. When growing sorghum as a monocrop, the sowing and the planting rates are detailed below. These can range between 3 to 20 kilograms per hectare for the sorghum and Sudan hybrids and sweet sorghum hybrids. The Sudan grass types tend to range between 2 and 20 kilograms per hectare. It is a lower concentration of sowing if you're under dryland conditions and higher if you're irrigated or with good soil moisture. When growing sorghum as part of a planting mix, it is recommended that you seed between 2 and 6 kilograms per hectare for the sorghum, Sudan hybrids and sweet sorghum hybrids, and slightly lower at between 2 and 4 kilograms per hectare for the Sudan grass mixtures. This is on dry land, assuming favourable environmental conditions. Sorghum can be grown with other species, and this is called companion planting. It is not recommended that you plant grasses with sorghum. Due to its competitive nature, it will outcompete these grasses very quickly. The legumes lamb and cowpeas, although difficult to manage owing to their different maturity times of the foliage, if they are grown with sorghum, they are good companion crops. Sorghum adapted to fertile soil conditions. Therefore, you need to look closely at nitrogen. If your soils are low, ensure you monitor them and add enough nitrogen for this crop's requirement. Ensure that you have adequate soil moisture when you are doing this. This plant will extract significant nutrients throughout the growing period due to the large foliage area it has. For hay and silage production in particular, you need to base your fertilizer budgets on your soil test. Ensure particularly that nitrogen and potassium are at recommended dosage, as this is required for maintenance of feed quality. Sorghum can be grazed heavily at between 1 and 1.2 metres height. Do not graze below 15 centimetres if regrowth is required, as you will remove the shoot apical meristem and further growth will not continue. If you slash after grazing, you will promote even regrowth. You can expect 4 or more grazings a year under ideal growing conditions, that is with good moisture and good nitrogen and potassium. The following is a list of the most common cultivars of sorghum grown in Australia. There is some additional information about time of flowering and the important characteristics that this cultivar may display. Globally, sorghum is the 5th most important cereal crop grown in the world. The USA produce the most amount of it, at 8.8 million metric tons per year. This is followed closely by India, Mexico, then Nigeria and Argentina. The global trend of production is one of reducing. 30 years ago, the world was producing 62.8 million metric tonnes over an area of 44.5 million hectares. This is now reduced to 44.5 million metric tonnes across an area of 41.9 million hectares. The global yields tend to range from 1,400 to 1,412 kilograms per hectare. The following slide shows Australian production of sorghum from 1960 to 2013. As you can see, production was quite low in the 1960s and is about threefold higher than what it used to be. There is some seasonal variation to its productivity, but the overall trend is an increase in sorghum production. On the whole, sorghum is considered at low risk with respect to disease when grown in Australia. It does occasionally suffer from a midge larvae attack. This is where the sorghum is eaten by the midges during the floret or flowering stage. This prevents the grain developing. The sorghum grain contains 11.3% protein, 3.3% fat, and about 56 to 73% starch. It is relatively rich in iron, zinc, phosphorus and B-complex vitamins. Tannins are found particularly in red grain types. They contain antioxidants that protect against cell damage, a major cause of disease and aging. The protein and the starch in sorghum grain are more slowly digested than those of other cereals, and the slower rates of digestibility are particularly beneficial for people with diabetes. Sorghum starch is gluten-free, making sorghum a good alternative to wheat flour for individuals who suffer from celiac disease. After watching this lecture, you should have an idea of the description and adaptation of sorghum. You should also be able to describe the industry requirements and how several cultivars are able to meet these requirements. You will be familiar with the rising production of sorghum in Australia, which has been increasing steadily since the 1960s. It is worth noting that globally, sorghum is the 5th most important cereal crop. And finally, we have looked at some of the management aspects of sorghum, particularly issues such as soil moisture and heavy clays, nutrient requirements of nitrogen and potassium and ongoing nutrient requirements throughout the season, and finally that sorghum can be used for the grain or foliage, but in Australia production tends to be more foliage orientated, and that it can have at least 4 grazings a season. This brings us to the end of our lecture.